Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Bernt-Santy, who's been rambling on and on to this week's guest for quite a while before we hit record. But we've got Ron Grady here. Hi, Ron. I almost said hi,
Uh,
Ron. See, I'm fucking it up already. Hi, Ron Grady.
Heather Bernt-Santy.
What do you want folks to know about you, Ron?
Oh my gosh, what do I want people to know about me? Let's see. I feel like, oh gosh, it's always hard where to start. Well, let's see. I love kids.
Uh-huh.
I feel like I'm a preschool teacher, and I say feel like I am a preschool teacher. I feel like I will always be. That's like the core of who I am.
Mhm.
I taught preschool for 6 years in New Orleans, most recently, but I've worked with kids and families for over 10 years, which is wild to say, ever since undergrad, where I actually got my start at a lab preschool, helping a
Okay.
doc student run studies. And so ever since then, I have just been fascinated by kids' worlds. And so
Uh-huh.
after college, started teaching preschool and very recently have started a PhD program. So I'm a second year grad student, studying education and getting to spend time with kids and, study their worlds and just really dive into the richness that there is. Two other things, I guess. Also, I have a children's book called What Does Brown Mean to You,
Oh,
that
yeah.
came out in January. And I have a book coming up with Red Leaf Press, called Honoring the Moment, in young
Mhm.
children's lives. And it's on observation, documentation, and reflection. And that'll be out mid next year. But yeah, no, I guess I love kids. I love this work, and I'm
Yeah.
so happy to be here.
Awesome, awesome. I had forgotten about. I'm glad you mentioned the children's book. I'm glad you did both because I love it when people plug for
Uh,
themselves on the show. But I that will remind me to put a link to
uh,
the children's book in the episode description so people can find it. And excited to hear about the new one coming out.
well, thanks. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to keep that on my radar. So you also have a website, which I'll let you plug at the end, but that's sort of where I found the blog post. It's not even sort of where I found it. It's absolutely where I found this blog post that I wanted to talk with you about today. And first, I guess I'll say thanks to Kirsten at Exchange for introducing us because this is good. I really have enjoyed digging into your blog, but this post you wrote, it's from a year ago, I think. I think it's not your most recent, but it's called Listening for Invisible Intentions. And the quote that I'll use to start us is childhood. Heather. Okay, I'm gonna try it again. Childhood is full of invisible intentions, the ones that, without listening, would bloom and die without our knowledge.
Mm.
And the blog, of course, is expanding on that. But tell me what does that mean, and how did you get there?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think that one of the like great joys of like being an early childhood educator is that we get to sit with children in like the small, tiny moments, right, that are just so rich. And I think that, what that means to me, I think in that moment of writing and now as well is just like this idea that, you know, there are a million little processes happening at any given moment. And it's so easy to miss the threads. It's easy to miss the threads of what's unfolding. And in the context of this blog in particular, I was sort of like, trying to ask questions, get in there, right? Further that conversation, learn. I had really good intentions,
Mhm,
but I was so focused on speaking and sort of like probing, if you will,
mhm.
rather than listening. And I would have missed the entire trajectory of this conversation had I not just been like realize that, hey, like I need to shut up right now, to bluntly, right? Like,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
conversation is not for me at this moment, and that's okay. But I get a chance to watch this thing like, form, right?
yeah.
And yeah, and I don't know, and I think just to quickly like tie that up, at least insofar as I was thinking about it then too, is like this idea that like the intention, like maybe also wasn't even fully formed yet, right? So I was asking about something that came alive within the context of that interaction. And so when I was asking about this thing, it was like, I don't know. It's like, yeah, because maybe it wasn't there yet. Maybe it
Mhm,
wasn't really realized yet. And so,
yeah.
really just inviting myself into a like listening stance.
Yeah, and what you're describing, the moment you were in there, is children were using watercolors.
Yeah.
And so, and that, what I love is when we have something like this that's written about something that literally just happens in the normal world, just in our regular world every day.
Yeah.
That, just like you said, could be kind of overlooked because we don't slow ourselves down to see that, or we're not reflective enough within ourselves, or we're busy or whatever to see that, that magical thing, or we're so into our scripts,
Yes.
that we feel like we need to sit there and ask the color questions, and what are you making, and write down their narrations and all the things that the textbooks tell us to do.
Totally, yes. Oh my gosh, I so resonate with exactly what you're saying, and I feel like that script, and we also have like I think often have these scripts too of like what can be like meaningful or what can be
Mhm.
deep. I think we have like this very, there's I feel like there's a thread in early childhood that is like very focused on like the idea that like you have to have even a certain aesthetic, right? Like the watercolors, for example, like and I say this as someone who loves the aesthetic and thinks it's super important, but I also understand that like at the end of the day, like the quality of the interaction is in this watercolor that has all the colors mixed everywhere, just on a wooden table outside. There's kids, like that's where it's happening, right in the
Uh-huh.
moments of the everyday
Uh-huh.
of living. And yeah, what does it take to get us to move beyond those scripts and really just to
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
I feel like the aesthetic piece is really big right now in terms of
Yeah,
conversations that are happening about working with young children.
yeah,
Um, I think it kind of started with our obsession with Reggio.
yeah, totally, totally,
um,
totally.
and and lots of other things. And I do believe that we should do what we can to see that children have beautiful spaces and intention behind that too, but it can't be the end. That's not
Yeah.
the only thing that we set up and then say, okay, well, you have beauty now.
Right. See, I so agree. And I feel like, that the beauty of like the early childhood like lives within the interaction, lives
Mhm,
within the relationship. It's the relationship that imbues any space with beauty,
mhm.
right? Um, because I've had experiences, as I'm sure many of us listening, or many of, as well, like we've all had like, I've like had experiences in really beautifully like outfitted classrooms with the wooden toys, and like of course I love it, it's great, like yeah, I would choose it, sure, but like I've also worked in schools where we're outside and we're in trees and dirt, and that's beautiful as well, or where we're in a small house and there's a half wall here and an air conditioning unit in the window there and the drop ceiling above, so much beauty, right? And so I think that yeah, we can't like we have to be willing to see beauty
Yeah,
everywhere
yeah,
and to acknowledge that it's so much more expansive than we want to, you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I want to go back a little bit to the original quote piece, and
Yeah.
um, one of the things, so you describe noticing the
Mm.
watercolor interest in the children and their activity, um and you talk about how you attempted to strike up a casual conversation, but you end that piece of the blog with, I realize that it is my time to be silent, to
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's such a hard thing for people who feel like teaching is performing, or what if someone comes along and they see me just sitting here and not being in charge of things.
Yeah.
So how do you connect to that sort of cultural
Yeah.
realism, I guess, that
Yeah.
that we see so often.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes up is what you said about this fear that teaching has to be performance
Yeah.
and this hyper awareness. And it's one of those things where I'm curious where it starts, right? Because it's like we theoretically come into the field with a desire to like connect with children, and then somewhere along the way, so I don't know, is it like in prep programs? Is it in the way that like, the policy expectations of what we have to do and the benchmarks that we have to meet, like put that pressure on us? So I think that if I were to have any response to that, is that like being with the child and like, yes, like do your, sometimes in some contexts you have to do the script, you have
Mhm.
to say the thing. There are going to be people observing you, but I would hope at least that there is also space for listening. And I think, my advice is always just to start where you are, right?
Mhm.
Like you might look at someone being really silent and be like, oh my gosh, I could never do that. And that's okay. You don't have to, is the beauty,
Mhm.
right? Start with 3 minutes and just see what comes up for you, right? Of just like sitting with something, with sitting with a child, with not, not intervening, right? With not performing. Um,
Mhm.
and see what comes up. Make a little note about it. Great. Okay. And after a week, after 2 weeks of that, you might start to notice some trends and threads, and you've opened up space in your practice, right? Like this is lifelong work that we're doing. And, the systems I think that have made it so that we feel that teaching is performance, um, like aren't going to shift overnight. I think we can push
Mhm.
for them, but that's a whole, I think that's a whole other conversation. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I just
Yeah.
often think about where can we begin, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So, so my next question then is, you talked about how you've been doing this a long time, working with children, 10 years or so. And so I'm curious, is this where you've always been in your work with children? Is this just how you came into it, or has there been an evolution for you?
That's a really good question.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's yeah. It's almost like you do this. Um, so yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think that I've always liked to listen to people. So I think if I'm like being honest, it's probably something that comes naturally to me, but I think with young children, generally speaking, like there's no doubt that it is like I have been like mentored by awesome people. Like nothing like that's like it's not me. Like I
Mhm.
like to listen, but at the end of like I had no idea like what it really meant, right?
Yeah.
Like what listening with children meant. And so it really kind of just it started with like my time at being nursery school. I had like wonderful, wonderful people modeled what it meant to be with children, to
Mhm.
listen to children, to step back. And so for me, I'm so grateful that it is sort of like that's sort of what I started with, like
Mhm.
understanding as the norm. I know obviously there's all the intersections, right, of not having to worry about certain things and the intersections of privilege that come with that, being in a
Mhm.
university lab school,
Oh,
having the
yeah, sure.
space to do that. Um, but I'm grateful for those people, at being, and then my very first teacher, like when I started teaching, and I was like, fresh 22-year-old, 23-year-old. So like, oh, I'm going to teach a preschool. Great. Her name is Karen Sandstrand, and she is just phenomenal,
Uh-huh.
phenomenal. She is like my rock and my foundation. So she taught me like really on the day to day in the midst of all of the craziness of all the
Mhm.
obligations. She showed me what it meant to be with children. And so I hold her like in my heart as I move
Mhm.
this work. She's just so and that sort of has been my trajectory. And
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if we just all had these mentor opportunities to mentor and to be mentored? Um I went sort of backwards. I started so I've been doing this about 30 years. And my first job I was only 19 and had no training. Didn't know you could get, I didn't know you stud this was the thing you study. I just knew
Mhm.
it felt right to be with children
Yeah.
for me. And so there were 24 2-year-olds and 4 adults in this big church room and not very many materials because we had to be able to put everything away on the church days.
Yeah, yeah,
So it was really wild. But I felt like I had this conflict of here's what
yeah.
my instinct is telling me,
Mhm,
but here's what my image of a teacher is. And even though
mhm,
my instinct was pulling me one way, my sort of script of what a
mhm,
teacher is
mhm,
um
mhm.
was pulling me into this other way where I felt like, yeah, I've got to be in charge and I'm the star of the show here. and,
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
and if I'd had a mentor,
Yeah.
it would have been different, but I learned so much in the path that I was in, that it was okay. But then when I just about 2018, I started working at it was a clinical lab
Okay.
preschool at Purdue, but it was in the speech language and hearing department. So that's what the focus was. But we had grad students in there to be mentored, and it was such a different. Initially, I was like, there are too many adults in here. I can't handle it. I need my comfort zone of not enough adults. It was really a bizarre process. Anyway, what I'm saying is, I kind of went. It took me a long time to have an experience where I could really see the value of that kind of the word is failing me, defined mentorship, I guess. And since then I've been like, man, if we could have this going in all of our kinds of early childhood programs, if this could be a model.
Yeah.
But that falls into the category of what a high school classmate of mine used to say: if wishes and butts were candy and nuts, what happy children we'd be.
Okay. So yeah, yep, that's well said. Oh my gosh.
Okay. Sorry, that went down the Heather Road for a minute.
No, I love it. I love it. Yeah.
The other thing that I liked a lot of the content, but I'm also sort of a language nerd and just like when words are cool or new phrasings of things. But you say very early in the post that early childhood materials are latent with potential relational energies. And I wanted folks to hear you talk about that and what that means.
Yeah, thank you for like, I guess like connecting with that. Yeah, I think that, I don't know, I think that there's something about like certain materials that, like, I don't know, maybe this is gonna sound too woo-woo, whatever, but
I
like,
like woo-woo. Go ahead.
cool. We're okay, I'm in company then, but like that has the potential, I don't know, to like connect children, like because of the very nature, like I don't know, like if you look at watercolors, right? Like they blend, their borders like are sort of, especially in the way that children use them, they're very permeable, they're constantly being refined and changed, and they meld into one another and they become something that like is like, was separate and is joined in this other context being the paper, and then like being on the paper together, coming together, like now there's this entirely new watercolor interaction. And I think that, and there are other materials that I think have a similar thing, right? Like, I think blocks are also something similar, especially in a collaborative space. But like, when I was thinking about watercolor, I felt like it was such a powerful metaphor for that interaction itself as well, right? Like these children here having this conversation, they're on the paper, which is the classroom, there are the watercolors, their thoughts, their actions. And it really is just, I think a way of, at least that I hope that I can continue to look at like materials as like something that's really beautiful, right? This, what's it, the 12 watercolor tray is like so much more than this little cheap plastic tray. It is like, it's this thing, right? And yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does, and I love it because the tendency, and this is systemic. I mean, this is what the system forces us to frame it as. The tendency is we think about materials in terms of, do I have enough of what licensing says I need to have? Do I have all of my content areas covered? Do I have stuff for math? Do I have stuff for science? Do I have art? And I've done that.
Yeah,
There's not necessarily anything wrong with saying I want to make sure that everything in this space
right.
is thought intentionally, included. But then I don't know, this way of thinking about it as having potential relational energies makes it deeper. I mean, it sort of makes more explicit the depth of what we're doing with young children and the experiences they can be having with us.
No, thank you. I appreciate you, like, I think bringing that idea forth and just like, sticking. Yeah, I think you're so right, right? Like, again, as you said, there's nothing wrong with having like a checklist. It's really
Mhm.
can be helpful.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that it does, like you're saying, like it reinforces this idea of like, okay, we need this pushes us back into the scripts, which again are so helpful and so useful, especially on a really rough day
Yeah.
when I didn't get any sleep last night, my coffee hasn't kicked in, I'm grateful to have this thing, but yeah, it really it doesn't take much. And I think that it's this constant back and forth too, right? Of realizing that like we need to do these things and we need to have these standards. And also, like you mentioned earlier, our instincts uh,
Mhm.
through these, through our relationships, through our stepping back, through our presentation of just like the simplest materials, our instincts are valid. And,
Mhm.
we can trust them because no one knows these children in this space like we do
Mhm.
as educators, right? As people working with children. And so, we can take our wonderful guidelines with a grain of salt or two or three or a whole salt, depending on where you are,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so yeah, and I just think, like you're saying, just bringing respect, like these materials, it's almost like sacred in a way, they
Mhm.
really are, right? Like, because of the relationship that they contribute to and generate.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's right up my witchy alley, Ron.
Yeah.
Okay, let me look and see what else I wanted
Oh,
to
of course.
hear about. I guess I wanted to we talked a little bit about your idea that you realized it's time to be silent and to listen. And what I didn't do is follow up and say and ask you to talk about how do you make that decision? How do you know that this is the time to be silent and this is the time to maybe draw them
Yeah.
out or just engage in relational conversation.
Totally, totally. I think I start off with like a foundation of giving myself grace to mess up
Mm,
because
very important, yes.
it's like like I feel like this blog post is like written like it's Vanessa's narrative, but like there's like who knows? I don't remember the like what happened after at this point, but like
Yeah.
probably that same day I interjected again, right? So I think with just like kindness to yourself, but
Yeah.
also I think it's like always asking like, why am I saying this? What am I like, why do I feel like I need to add something to this? Right.
Mhm,
And I think that just starting with being aware of why, like
mhm,
you're saying, is helpful. Or like you mentioned earlier, right? Of like, do I feel like I need to be the star of the show? Am I actually curious about this thing? Do I
mhm,
really want to know if this child knows their colors right now? Is there another way? So thinking like, why am I asking this? Also thinking about opportunity as well. And I guess by that I mean, you know, we spend a lot of time with children. So like like chances are you'll get a chance to interject again if you really need. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there'll be times to talk with them and to get that stuff. Like we're typically not at a shortage of hours spent with these
Uh-huh,
young humans, right? And so not, I think I would even err on, and I often do err on the side of silence
uh-huh.
in my interactions, or just space, I guess is
Yeah.
probably a better way to say that, and um, then also like I think children also will give you cues too, right? Like often, and I don't know, in a depending on the tone, can
Mhm,
be a cue like I maybe don't want to talk with you right now. Like
mhm,
children are in schools in childcare because of so many things, because it's supportive, because it's a needed service, because it's great for development, creativity, community. But one of the things that I think we often forget is that children are actually living their day-to-day lives too.
mhm.
Like maybe they don't want to talk right now.
Yeah.
And that's a cue. Like maybe it's time to not push.
Yeah.
And I think many of us have interacted with children and seen how if they do want to bring something back up, many children, not all, but many children will mention it when it's
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
Uh, they'll come back to it, especially if you have a pre-existing relationship that's one of trust and warmth, right? Like
Right.
they'll come to you when they're ready to talk about this thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, I
and
think imagine if we're doing our work, whatever that is, um, and you've got someone who just plops down next to you and starts peppering you with either quiz questions or genuine like interest,
right,
but you're not ready for it, or you're facing a deadline, or you just want to be by yourself for a minute. It's so much easier to um connect how we might feel in that situation to approaching children who are using watercolors like you did with this in this experience, and keeping that idea that in the same way that it's okay for me to not want to be interrupted and or even just talk to, it doesn't even have to be that negative connotation of the interruption, can help guide us with young children too
I appreciate that.
in that
Yeah.
moment. I remember this. So I have two kids, Curtis and Josie. They're
Okay.
both grown-ups now. But when Josie was 4, we were at like their dad was a grad student, and we were at a grad student picnic of some kind, and
Yeah.
we're from Nebraska, and the football team's the Cornhuskers. So Josie had a Cornhuskers shirt on, and this other guy was like, Cornhuskers, what about bean huskers? And then what about tomato huskers? And just thinking I don't know, he wasn't even really trying to engage. But anyway, I remember 4-year-old Josie turned around and went, what about shut your mouth, Husker?
Oh, yes, yes.
And I was like, okay, that might not have been the best moment, but it's such a good attention grabbing example of sometimes we can just leave them alone and read their cues, even if you're just trying to be friendly or funny or whatever it might be. Sometimes it's just their space.
Yes, totally. I +1 all that. Like, that's so great. How about shut your
Oh
mouth?
my God. I know. Yeah.
Real, right? So
Yeah.
real.
28-year-old grad
Oh.
student Josie really probably appreciates that I just shared that story again. They're probably just so used to it. Okay, so what else did I want to ask you about now that I've derailed things with my Josie story?
No, I sorry, I also just wanted to say that reminds me of just like we can't
Yeah.
like we can't like make children's work like and their lives fit into only our intentions, right?
Yeah.
Like we can't subvert their stuff, right? They deserve to have something just be for them. Yeah.
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 So-
I don't know. What else do you want to say about this? Anything else about this experience that you had, or the idea of invisible intentions?
yeah, I think that, I think that early childhood, and this is kind of like there's a piece I like read and have been holding really close to my heart for a couple of years now by like scholars like Haney Yoon and Tran Templeton who are in Teachers College, and they
Okay.
like write about the difficulties of hearing children out in an adult centered world, and what it's like to listen to children. And I think that that is just sort of like, that thread, this thread, like those are the threads that I just think is just, what I want to take
Uh-huh.
from, what I'm still taking from, what I hope others take from this piece is that, we really have to work to listen, right? Like with all of our wonderful intentions,
Mhm.
right? Like all of our love for children, all of our enthusiasm for even their lives as humans, right?
Mhm.
Like we can still push too far. So really just like constantly being reflective, checking in with ourselves
Mhm.
and allowing ourselves to just give children space because they're going to surprise us. They always do. They're
Yeah.
always, there's stuff there. So
Yeah. So I want to ask, and I think we've probably touched on this, you've probably touched on this throughout the conversation so far, but what what's the benefit
yeah.
of shifting into this way of thinking, or leaning into this way of thinking, if we already um uh are sort of there but want to be more intentional about it?
Yeah.
um what do we get from it? What do the children get from it? It's
Yeah.
capitalism. We've got to get something.
Yeah, right. My gosh. Geez, yes. Again, another potentially awesome
Yeah.
conversation. But for real though, no, I think that like, benefits benefits for teachers are like I think manifold, right? Like there is this idea that not this idea, like I think we become just like more reflective. Like
Uh-huh.
I think if you're not like you just have to be listening, you have to be processing. You learn about yourself as a person, you learn about yourself as like a facilitator of children's like learning and creative experiences. And you also, I think it can be actually really advantageous when you're thinking about like assessments.
Mm-hmm.
Like assessments is something that I will admit, like I don't have a lot of experience with assessments.
Mm-hmm.
It was never my favorite thing to do. I never liked the checklist, and I was, I tried to always be in spaces where I didn't have to do things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
like, nonetheless, I do think that like there is something that when you sit and you notice, like you can draw upon so many of these like things like these like and I think I'm speaking even beyond just like learning stories. Like I understand that those are very rich,
Mm-hmm.
but like you can see the way that a child is understanding like number theory, like as they're making these small dots and lines on the page, and if you see them pause and then add another one and are watching the way that their mouth moves, like you get it, like you say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
look, you've got this, right? I see that in this moment you understand this, and you can make that note. And I think you get so many useful snippets and snapshots
Mm-hmm.
when you can step back. And especially also if you're someone who is hoping to move that sort of needle, or if you're because I think we're all in different spaces. Some people really appreciate that, some people really want to push against that. And I think as someone who always felt like more in the camp of pushing against that, luckily, but
Yep.
also so I feel like that was sort of, to use like a metaphor that I don't really love, like metaphor, but that was sort of like I guess a tool in my arsenal, if you will, or like,
Mm-hmm.
something that I was like, okay, I know that we've got this that I've seen, that I've observed um, across this time. So I'm not going to actually do this thing, but I'm going to actually, when I'm talking with you about your child's understanding of number, I'm going to reference all of these things, and not some time that we were sitting down counting cubes, right? And then so that's teacher stuff. Sorry, that was a
Yeah.
little bit raw and Grady soapbox moment.
Yeah. No, that's good.
But for children, I think they feel respected. I think children also know when we are genuinely interested in them as people,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and in their experiences. Children, yeah, no, I think that's like the hugest thing, because I think children are going to be creative and imaginative no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they have so much, that's their, regardless of context. But I think that children feel seen, they feel understood,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I think there's a level of trust, right? Because again, kind of like we alluded to earlier, children are often being interrupted or redirected or channeled into a different activity, or told that their time's up and it's got to go away. And so they're constantly starting and stopping, um, and often against their will. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
they can build a trust with you when they know that you can sit there with them and that you can step back. And yeah, I think also, I guess lastly, I think it's also a model for caregivers as well, right? Because they don't often, at least many caregivers don't get to know their children in this way.
Mm-hmm.
We're spending a lot of time with them, and our environments are often set up for children.
Yeah.
Whereas, in your day-to-day life at home, you may not get to see your child in this way. And so we also get to share children and kind of like reintroduce them to their caregivers
Mm-hmm.
in that way, which can be really powerful for relationship and just appreciation as a whole.
Yes. And takes a lot of pressure off
Mm,
of the, people, parents, caregivers, whoever's in that position with the child. They often feel like we need to be constantly doing, if I'm a good parent, grandparent,
yeah.
whatever, again, I need to be leading everything and making sure everything is quote unquote educational. And I feel like shifting their view in this way gives them permission to relax and enjoy that child. And that's what's missing from so many of our contexts, I think, is that ability to just relax and enjoy the human being in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which there's so many competing forces to that whenever we can find moments, even if it's just, because how long would you say you sat and watched this watercoloring,
Geez, I mean, that was probably
or how long it
that
lasted for them?
probably, I would say probably lasted, I mean, at least 10 minutes. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's probably there for like, I mean, this snippet probably, I mean, is not even a full thought, like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. But I talk about that a lot when we're talking about observing and assessing, when I'm talking with students or other people who are working in the field,
Mhm.
because the idea is, well, I have too much to do to sit and watch this, just let this unfold or pay that close of attention to things. It doesn't really take when we think about the span of the hours that we're there together that you mentioned earlier every day,
Mhm.
and then maybe you allow yourself to take longer periods. But to start, you don't have to just scrap your whole day and say, I'm doing nothing
Yep.
but looking for it for invisible
Well,
intentions today.
yeah,
I'm sorry, boss. I listened to a podcast this weekend. They said I can't talk to children.
I'm literally just sitting here. That's it. That's all right. No, so I agree. And like I as like just to like add on to that too, like I have been so I've been starting like my field work as part of my research, and
Uh-huh.
I'm I was saying I'm back in schools, which is really lovely. And as part of my like approvals and stuff, I can do video and whatnot, which is great. But like I've realized again going back, like transcribing 40 seconds of a video with, three children around a certain material interaction, like that can be like a page if you when you
Uh-huh.
go, but that's like, and I guess like that's a lot. There's a
Yes.
lot. There's so much there, right? So
Yeah.
I just want to echo again, like what you were saying, like you can start with a tiny, 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 tiny snippet, and see what emerges,
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ron, for this
Yeah.
conversation, for the blog post. I hope people will go find you. Yeah, so your website is called Childology, right?
Yep. Yep.
And what's the address? What's the
Oh yeah, it's
just yeah,
childology.co.co.
just
So yeah.
.co. Okay, yeah. And what else? Oh, I was gonna let you plug your book again, or ask you to plug your books again here
Yeah.
at the end.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah. So, What Does Brown Mean to You is out. It's a children's book published with Penguin, Random House. You can get it in all the places. And really excited to have that in the world. And then I think it is my book for educators is available for pre-order. I know
Okay.
it's available on the big box, and then also I think on Red Leaf's website.
Yeah.
But it's called Honoring the Moment in Young Children's Lives,
Uh-huh.
Observation, Documentation, and Reflection. And so it'll be out officially next summer, but it's
Cool.
available for order now. So
Well, I'm
super.
excited. I missed somehow. I didn't realize there was a book coming, an adult book, an educator book coming, and so my nerd ears perked up. I'm very excited. So again, just thank you for being here. It's been really so nice to talk with you about this and to just hear you speak more about the things I'd already seen you writing. So I appreciate it, and I hope you'll come on again sometime.
Yes.
So thank you for being here, and thanks everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.